Welcome back to my channel. I'm Jhonna, and this is Jhonna, Unfiltered. We're continuing the series on MBTI types as narcissistic parents, and today's type is one that I think will genuinely surprise some people. Because when most people hear the word narcissist, they picture someone loud, domineering, or obviously controlling. Today's type doesn't look like that at all. We're looking at INFPs, also known as the mediator type. Before I get into it, the usual disclaimer. I'm not a psychologist, a doctor, or a licensed therapist. Nothing in this video is intended as a clinical diagnosis or medical advice. This is my personal learning diary where I share my own research and observed patterns. If you are struggling with your mental health or family situation, please reach out to a licensed professional. Most INFPs are not narcissists. Most are genuinely kind, empathetic, and emotionally sensitive people who make wonderful parents. But when narcissistic patterns layer onto the INFP style, what you get is something called covert narcissism. And covert means hidden. It means the control isn't obvious. It doesn't shout. It whispers. And that's exactly what makes it so difficult to recognize and so hard to recover from. Let me start with what INFP actually means. INFP stands for introverted, intuitive, feeling, and perceiving. People of this type are often described as dreamers, idealists, and deeply compassionate individuals. They care a lot about authenticity, about meaning, and about living in alignment with their values. A healthy INFP parent is genuinely one of the most nurturing and validating kinds of parent a child can have. They respect the child's individuality. They create emotional space for the child to be exactly who they are without pressure to conform. They're sensitive in the best way, tuned into the child's inner world and genuinely invested in it. But when narcissism enters that picture, something specific and troubling happens. The empathy doesn't disappear entirely, but it becomes selective and self-serving. The sensitivity, instead of being directed outward toward the child, turns inward. And the parent's emotional world becomes the center of gravity in the household, around which everything and everyone else has to organize themselves. Let me explain the core pattern. The INFP narcissistic parent builds their entire identity around being a good, caring, sacrificial person. They genuinely believe this about themselves. They see themselves as someone who has given up things, suffered for others, endured more than most people would. And because that's how they understand themselves, any feedback to the contrary feels like an attack on their identity. Not just a disagreement, a betrayal. The control in this dynamic doesn't come through rules or authority. It comes through feelings. Through the child's awareness of what makes the parent sad. Through the child's learned understanding that their independence, their disagreement, their separate needs, cause the parent pain. And a child who loves a parent doesn't want to cause them pain. So they adjust, they shrink, they manage themselves around the parent's emotional state. And over time, they lose track of what they actually want or need because that's never been the priority. This is what makes this type of narcissistic parenting particularly insidious. It doesn't feel like abuse. It feels like love. It's wrapped in warmth and sensitivity and tears. And the child often doesn't recognize it as harmful until much later, if at all. Because it's genuinely hard to name something as controlling when the person doing it is also the one who seems most hurt by everything. Let me talk about the mother and father version separately because they tend to express this pattern in distinct ways. The INFP narcissistic mother is often the most emotionally present parent imaginable in a way that eventually becomes suffocating. She's deeply invested in her relationship with the child. She wants closeness. She wants connection. But the connection she wants is one where the child is tuned into her, mirrors her, and stays emotionally available to her at all times. When the child starts developing their own separate identity, their own preferences, their own way of being in the world that's different from hers, she experiences it as loss, as abandonment. And she communicates that experience, not necessarily through words, but through sighs, through sadness, through a visible hurt that the child absorbs completely. She's the one who says things like, "I guess I'll just be here alone." Or, "I thought you understood me better than this." Or, "After everything I've been through, I never expected this from you." She doesn't say, "You can't go." She just makes it emotionally very expensive to go. And the child who loves her stays, or goes, and carries the weight of her sadness with them every step of the way. She also tends to idealize the child in a way that feels wonderful at first. You're so special. You understand things other people don't. You and I are the same. But that idealization comes with a hidden expectation. The child is supposed to stay that way, to keep being the child the mother decided they were. When the child grows and changes and becomes something different, something more fully their own, the mother can feel genuinely betrayed by that. As if the child changed on purpose, to leave her. The INFP narcissistic father is often more withdrawn than the mother version, but the emotional control is no less real. He tends to operate through disappointment rather than confrontation. He doesn't yell. He doesn't set rigid rules. He simply lets his sadness and his sense of being misunderstood settle over the household like fog. And the child, who is sensitive to that emotional atmosphere, spends enormous energy trying to clear it, trying to be the person that makes the father okay again. He may have strong ideals about what his family should look like, what values they should hold, what kind of life they should be living. And when the child's choices don't reflect those ideals, the father doesn't command them to change. He just communicates, through his emotional state, that the child has failed to be who he needed them to be. And for a child who loves this kind of father, that quiet disappointment is often harder to handle than any punishment would be. He's also likely to treat the child as an emotional confidant, sharing things that are too heavy for a child to carry. His loneliness, his regrets, his sense of being misunderstood by the world. And the child, who is naturally empathetic, takes all of that in and holds it, becomes responsible for it, stops being a child because someone needed them to be more. Let me look at how financial situation shapes this dynamic. A wealthy INFP narcissistic parent provides comfort and security, but ties it to emotional compliance. The child has material needs met, often very generously. But the generosity comes with an invisible cost. To receive it without guilt, the child has to stay emotionally loyal to the parent, has to validate the parent's feelings, has to be the audience for the parent's narratives about sacrifice and meaning, and the difficulty of being truly understood in this world. A struggling INFP narcissistic parent uses sacrifice as the primary currency of control. Everything the parent gave up becomes part of the story. Every hardship endured becomes evidence of their devotion. And the child, absorbing that story from a young age, grows up with a debt they feel they owe but can never quite define or repay. They work hard, they achieve, they try to make something of themselves. But it never quite feels like it's for themselves. It feels like it's something they owe. When substance dependence is involved with this type of parent, the emotional volatility that was already present becomes much more extreme. The INFP who is sensitive and occasionally overwhelmed becomes dramatically unpredictable. The quiet sadness turns into something louder and less manageable. And the child, who has learned to monitor emotional shifts carefully, now has to do that work under much harder conditions. The person they were trying to take care of has become someone they genuinely can't predict or soothe. Let me talk about what children of this type of parent tend to carry into adulthood. They're often extraordinarily empathetic, not just as a skill, but as a reflex. They learned early that other people's emotional states were something to track, to respond to manage. And that ability to read people doesn't switch off. In adult relationships, they often find themselves drawn to people who need emotional support, who are struggling in some way, who need to be understood. Partly because that's what they know love to look like. They also tend to struggle deeply with limits. Saying no feels like hurting someone. Asserting their own needs feels like being selfish. And the internal voice that tells them this sounds remarkably like the parent who taught them that their independence was painful. In adult relationships, they may find themselves consistently giving more than they receive and not quite knowing how they got there because it happened so gradually and felt so familiar. They may carry a specific kind of guilt that doesn't have a clear source. Just a general sense that they aren't doing enough, that they're disappointing someone, that their existence has cost others something they can never make up for. That guilt was installed so early and so quietly that it feels like their own voice rather than something they learned. Many children of INFP narcissistic parents also struggle with identity confusion. They know what the parent wanted them to be. They know how to be the version of themselves that kept things emotionally stable at home. But they don't always know, underneath all of that, who they actually are when nobody needs anything from them. Figuring that out is genuinely one of the most important and most difficult parts of recovery from this kind of experience. Before I close, I want to say something directly. If you grew up with a parent whose feelings were always the most important thing in the room, and whose love felt genuine but conditional on your emotional loyalty, your experience was real. The love was sometimes real too, and the harm was also real. Both of those things can be true at the same time. And you're allowed to set limits on a relationship that still operates on those old terms, even if the person on the other side is genuinely hurt by it. Their pain doesn't automatically make your limit wrong. Before I go, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had a parent or a significant person in your life whose sadness or emotional state you felt responsible for? And how did that shape how you show up in your adult relationships? Drop it in the comments if you're comfortable. These are the kinds of experiences that so many people carry quietly, and naming them out loud can genuinely help. Thanks for watching. If this video resonated with you, please consider hitting the subscribe button. I want to be upfront and share that I use this text-to-speech voice to tell my stories because as a full-time ESL teacher, I have to be very careful with my vocal cords. Managing vocal nodules means I have to save my voice for my students, but I didn't want that to stop me from sharing these unfiltered thoughts with you. I'm Jhonna, and I'm currently working toward my goal of 1,000 subscribers so I can finally monetize this channel and turn this passion into a sustainable part of my future. This is my diary of solo living here in the Philippines, and your support, whether through a comment or a sub, helps me keep this channel growing. If you would like to help out even more, you can check out the Buy a Treat for My Pets link in the description. My dogs definitely appreciate the love. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss the next update. Thank you for being such an important part of this journey. I'm Jhonna, and I will see you in the next one.